Na escola, no trabalho, na política, comunicação que educa, democratiza. Tá tudo no coração, melodia e percussão. A música afasta o medo e faz a mobilização. Pra quem vai o seu amém, pra quem julga e machuca. Pra quem vai o seu amém, pra quem sobrevive e luta. Pra quem vai o seu amém, pra quem julga e machuca. Pra quem vai o seu amém, pra quem sobrevive e luta. Lembro dos nomes que inspiram, na nossa voz são eternos. Sempre de cabeça erguida, a nossa luta revive. Lembro do som da quebrada, do brilho dos nossos sonhos. O som derruba muralhas, e o nosso grito não para.
It is my sheer pleasure to introduce Denise Hurd. She is the Associate Director of the Haas Institute for Fair and Inclusive Society, and she is a longtime member of the Institute's Diversity and Health Disparities Research Cluster. And she is also, if that's not enough, an Associate Professor of Public Health here at UC Berkeley. Her scholarship has centered on the racialized disparities in health outcomes. Her work spans topics varied as much as images of drugs and violence in rap music, drinking and drug use patterns, social movements, and the impact of corporate targeting and marketing on popular culture, especially among African American youth. In addition to extensive scholarship in public health, Hurd has also served as an associate dean at UC Berkeley School of Public Health for several years. In addition to all of this, Denise Hurd is one of the few members in the administration who backed us without hesitation, and we cannot thank her enough for that. So it's my sheer pleasure to welcome Professor Denise Hurd.
Thank you so much, Jess, for those really kind remarks. And I just want to say that it's really my great pleasure to be here. When I was asked to say a few words to kick the conference off, I think Maria Fatima said, well, we want you to talk about the themes of the conference and to, kind of talk about how important they are. And I can't tell you how important the themes of anti-Black state violence are to my work and to our concern about African Americans both here and globally. This is such a crucial theme, and the conversations that have already started and that you're going to have today, I think are really critical, and they're critical for everybody. I, in my own work, didn't set out to study slavery or violence, but I'm doing it because it has turned up in my work. I work on health inequalities and health disparities, and if you want to understand whether or not the country thinks Black Lives Matter, all you have to do is look at health statistics right here in Berkeley. African Americans are 10 times more likely to be hospitalized for cardiovascular disease, about 8 to 10 times more likely to be hospitalized for diabetes, and the list goes on. So when we look at those kinds of gaps, we know that the truth is our lives don't matter as much as they should. Now, as someone that's been teaching public health for a long time, there's a lot of concern about what kind of social elements could be affecting our health. We know that your zip code is more important than your genetic code. But until recently, people in public health have not been looking at violence. And I looked up one day and I said, you know what? I've been teaching these classes for 18 years. We've got to start putting policing. I have to start putting policing in my class, because when I look at those health disparities, and then when I look at the criminal justice disparities, there's a relationship, and we haven't been exploring it in public health. So right now, my class is the only class where we even look at policing as a public health issue. So violence does not just include aggression and those kinds of things. Violence is structural, and it means the kinds of social conditions that prevent us from having health, wealth, and the pursuit of happiness. So violence is a really, really critical issue, and we're starting to turn the light through work at the Haas Institute for a Fair and Inclusive Society on the importance of violence as a public health issue and problem. So this is an important topic, and it's important for everybody. So I wanted to talk a little bit, just mention policing, because that's one of the direct aggressors on Black health. There's a lot of talk about incarceration, but policing is much broader than incarceration. So we've got surveillance, stop and frisk, arrest, detention, incarceration, and shootings. And everybody knows that police shootings and chokeholds and that kind of thing are harmful, tasing. But we can also see that there's a school-to-prison pipeline that robs Black youth of education and leads to loss of all kinds of economic and educational opportunities. We have people criminalized by an unjust system. They're denied housing, they're denied jobs, they're denied voting. But the harm doesn't stop with individuals. Communities suffer the collateral damage of seeing the repeated victimization of police shootings and so forth and so on. So there's also an economic drain that communities face. They're posting bail, people are attending funerals. So this has an overall harmful effect on African American communities. So in one paper on the necropolitics of violence said, living under the constant threat of violent death transforms those who are not slain into the as yet slain, but unmistakably closer to death, the constantly harassed, stressed, and unduly constrained slain and waiting. So Roxanne Gay says, as a Black woman in America, I do not feel alive. I feel like I am not yet dead. So one of the theme for today's conference is on roots. And I think that theme is incredibly important because it pivots us right back to the centrality of slavery as the defining framework of Black-white life in the US and the origin of the incessant state violence that's directed at Black bodies. And so as we all know, under slavery, African Americans were harshly disciplined, mutilated, experimented on, raped, sold away from families and children, severely overworked, and deprived of many basic and human rights. And to make matters worse, white individuals were invested with state power to inflict violence. So today's anti-state violence at the hands of policemen is really reminiscent of the role of the slave owner or the white property owner who could just punish Black people at will. So, in fact, after the Eric Garner and Michael Brown killings, Ta-Nehisi Coates commented, "The police departments of your country have been endowed with the authority to destroy your body. It does not matter if the destruction of your body was an overreaction. It does not matter if the destruction of your body resulted from a misunderstanding. It does not matter if the destruction of your body springs from foolish policy. Sell cigarettes without proper authority, and your body can be destroyed. Resent the people trying to entrap your body, and it can be destroyed. Turn into a dark stairwell, and your body can be destroyed. The destroyers of your body will rarely be held accountable. Mostly, they will receive pensions." So in modern day America, it is as if we are reliving, or we have never left those same kind of conditions where we were subject to surveillance, to punishment at will, almost just randomly. So today's conference is going to focus on the roots of some of this anti-Black violent practices as a foundation. I mean, fortunately, we're not going to stay there because I know this conference is going to talk about the many efforts to resist and inspire conversations about what we do to remove this kind of oppression. This is also very timely because this year marks the 400th anniversary of slavery. In 1619, the first slave ships arrived in Jamestown. And so this means we have an opportunity to commemorate this very, very important event and to recognize the 400 years of struggle in America that African Americans have undergone. So the HIFIS, the Haas Institute for a Fair and Inclusive Society, will be sponsoring a year-long series of events. And this conference is one of the first events that's going to help anchor those conversations. So this is a really important event. This is a really important topic. And I'm so glad that we are all here and beginning the conversation and beginning that kind of reflection to show us where we've been, but not only that, where we're going to go in dealing with the kind of oppression that we've been subjected to. So thank you very much. And I want to thank the organizers, the students that have worked so hard. They've been working for months on this, emailing us and talking with us. And their dedication and their commitment is what we need to continue to resist those oppressive forces. Thank you so much.
Good morning, everyone. Good morning. So I first just want to say that it is really an honor to be able to be a witness to this amazing and unprecedented symposium and to be involved in the little ways that I've been involved. And I just wanted to give just huge amount of gratitude and thanks and love to Maria Fatima and to Jess Compton and to all the students who worked so hard on this conference. It is really a special thing to be able to witness just all of you guys in the same room and to be able to know the kinds of conversations we get to have together are special. We've already started to have them, and I know I'm gonna be emotional a lot over this conference, so I just wanna let you know that that's okay if that happens to you too. So this morning, I have the distinct honor to introduce one of my closest friends in this world and someone who I admire so deeply. Because of her brilliance and because of her commitment, I do not know another scholar with the level of political commitment as Christen Smith. And so I am so thankful to have her here, and she is going to be moderating this first panel. So Christen Smith is a cultural and social anthropologist and Black feminist performance studies scholar. She researches in gendered anti-Black state violence and Black community responses to it in Brazil and the Americas. She is an associate professor of African and African diaspora studies. Hold your seats because it keeps going. And anthropology at the University of Texas at Austin. Her work primarily focuses on transnational anti-Black police violence, Black liberation struggles, the paradox of Black citizenship in the Americas, and the dialectic between enjoyment of Black culture and the killing of Black people. Her 2016 book, Afro Paradise, Blackness, Violence, and Performance in Brazil, uses the lens of performance to examine the immediate and long-term impact of police violence on the Black population of Salvador da Bahia in Brazil, and the grassroots movement to denounce and end this violence. Her more recent comparative work examines the lingering, deadly impact of police violence on Black women in Brazil and the US. And she is also the brilliant activist scholar behind Cite Black Women, the hashtag, the t-shirts, the podcast that's coming at you. And so it is my honor to welcome Christen Smith. Please join me.
Professor Paschal caught me off guard with that introduction. Thank you, Professor Paschal, for your heartfelt introduction and your love and your care always. And I take the words that you gave to me and I send them back to you because the respect is equal for both the work that you do and the person that you are. And I also want to thank Maria Fatima, Jess Compton, for all of the hard work on this. This is a lot of work, and I've seen you all put in the work from afar, and I just want to say that we appreciate you for bringing together this historical event, and it really, truly is historical, and I just want to acknowledge that. And I also want to acknowledge my friends and colleagues, Milton Borges, Andrea Beatriz, Onire, for being here. It is an honor to also be here in your presence as well. And I'll say a little bit about them as I introduce, and also the illustrious Ericka Huggins, which is a huge honor for me because we never met personally, but I have been following your work for so long. So one of my tasks is to introduce this panel. And in addition to actually reading the bios like a good moderator, because of my proximity to the topic, they asked me to say a little bit about what this is all about and what this means. And I want to start that conversation by telling a brief story that will be part of my introduction to the speakers. So back in 2001, when I had just finished my first year of graduate school up the street at a university that will remain nameless, so down the street, well, Palo Alto, I traveled to Brazil for the first time. And like many graduate students, and like many of you that I know from the audience who are graduate students, I went with a lot of ideas and a lot of reading to start a project on the use of poetry and theater in the Black movement in Brazil. And it was much harder than I thought it was going to be, as we all find out very quickly. And I found there was a performance that was happening that was kind of this mixture between spoken word poetry and liberation performance theater that was happening at an event, a Black movement event, and everybody said, if this is going to be your project, you have to go. And so I went, and I was just blown away at the way that people were pulling together music and poetry, and was a stranglehold on the Black community with political imprisonment, the war on drugs, et cetera. And so I went through the whole thing. And one of the very first things that he said to me was, you know, one day I really want to go to the United States and meet some of the people from the Black Panther Party. That was in 2001. Here we are in 2019, and I'm going to try not to get emotional because I never imagined that this moment would be able to happen. It is a connection. It is literally ligando as lutas, connecting the struggles, and it is truly a historical moment that we are about to witness. And I share that personal story with you for you all to understand the broad sweeping repercussions of this. And once you hear their bios and the ways that their lives have been running parallel for so long, you will understand even more deeply the great political significance of today. Give me 1 second. So Hamilton Wale Borges dos Santos was born in Salvador, Bahia. He is a writer, poet, organic intellectual, and grassroots community activist who has always maintained a politically autonomous position relative to state power. He was an organizer within the United Black Movement, or the Movimento Negro Unificado, which was the first organized attempt in Brazil to consolidate a national Black movement. In the 1980s, he founded the poetry group Os Maloqueiros, and in the 1990s, founded the Black and Attitude Theater Teatro Negro e Atitude. He is coordinator of the Projeto Cultural Intramuros, which brings literature, music, and film to prisoners throughout the state of Bahia. He is co-founder of the Pan-Africanist Winnie Mandela School in Salvador, Bahia, and co-founder of the grassroots community action group Reaja, Será, Morto, which denounces and organizes against nationwide actions of state-sanctioned brutality and extrajudicial police violence in Black communities. Hamilton is one of the coordinators of the Transnational March Against the Genocide of Black People in Brazil, or a Marcha Transnacional contra o Genocídio do Povo Negro no Brasil. And he is the author of 2 books, A Teoria Geral do Fracasso, or General Theory of Failure, in 2017, and Salvador, Cidade Túmulo, or Salvador Tomb City, 2018. Ericka Huggins is an activist, former political prisoner, and leader in the Black Panther Party, educator, and student. She has devoted her life to the equitable treatment of all human beings beyond the boundaries of race, age, culture, class, gender, sexual orientation, ability, and status associated with citizenship. For the past 37 years, she has lectured across the country and internationally on issues related to the well-being of women and children and youth, restorative justice as the antidote to punitive justice, whole being education and the role of spiritual practice in sustaining activism and promoting social change. She spent 14 years in the Black Panther Party. The highlight, according to her, was her 8 years as director of the renowned Oakland Community School from 1973 to 1981. During that time, she became both the first Black person and the first woman appointed to the Alameda County Board of Education. She is currently one of the facilitators with World Trust. World Trust uses films that document through story the impact of systems of racial inequality. These films are tools to foster conversation about race and all structural inequalities. Please join me in welcoming Milton Borges and Ericka Huggins.
Good morning. How is everyone? Well, thank you for having me here, and I want to thank all of the organizers and the students who had anything large, medium, or small to do with today, and the conference, which is bigger than today, and the world that is bigger than UC Berkeley. Yes, I said that. And I'm so honored to be sitting here with you. I almost cried when you told your story of wanting to meet someone from the Black Panther Party. Thank you for being here. And thank you, Onede. And I hope your speaking tomorrow just will enter the ears of everyone and change them. He's 12. Amazing. Our future is really bright because of young people like the students, especially the graduate students who helped to put this together, and the young people like you, and everybody in between. And the people who are older, like me, have responsibility and must be accountable for our world. Not just our North American world, but the globe, the planet Earth, and the earthlings, all of us. Thank you, Fatima. And Jess, I don't know where she went, but thank you, Jessica. And all of the people who had to do with this. This is quite something, the synchronicity here this morning. And am I talking too fast? Can you understand? Can you? Okay. I didn't say bon dia. And it's important to honor the people that we're with specifically. Not just generally, hey, how you doing? But specifically as much as we can. We don't do that here in the United States enough. Thank you, Christen. You're amazing. And I'm going to cite you. So I just wanted to say the reason why I'm so touched this morning is because a few years ago I went to Brazil. I didn't go to what someone said, the best part, Salvador. But I went to Sao Paulo, and I spent 2 weeks there, and of my own choice, invited by Latin American studies people. And they took me everywhere. And I was so touched by what I saw, the struggles there. And I came back and I told my friends as best I could, and they were like, oh, that's nice. I don't know why except to say that we don't have a global awareness and perspective. What I saw transformed my understanding of a country that is so huge that the other South American countries look like little beacons surrounding it. I spent time with people from the Panther movement. If you don't know what it is, you really need to know. We struggle with homelessness in this country, but in Brazil, in Sao Paulo, I saw solutions that were real. Public land that was taken at the risk of death so that people could have a place to live. Poverty is an expression of structural racism and sexism and classism. No one wants to be poor. Living in conditions of poverty is what I'm saying. But while I was there, I was also touched by the fact, and I didn't know this. I knew it by reading, but as you said, when we go to a place that direct experience is so huge, I didn't know that there really was nothing like a civil rights movement in Brazil. A country which has the largest population of African people outside the continent of Africa. I didn't know that there was the so-called end to slavery, as it was here, and then space. And we've had all these movements, and there were movements there as well. I'm not minimizing movements there. But what the students and the people I talked to felt was how important it is to understand what the black people and the other people of color in the United States did. People said things like, you formed coalitions? Yeah, because we were going to die if we didn't. You work with everyone? We have nothing translated into Portuguese. Can you tell us what books to read? I started a project with a professor to translate a book about the Black Panther Party into Portuguese, a book called Black Against Empire. I wanted to live there. I wanted to say, I wanted to serve, and I want to go back. Is that what you're thinking when you think transnational? Or are you thinking about words on paper only? I'll stop by telling you this one story. While I was there for 2 weeks, I spoke to students, sometimes 2 or 3 times a day. I was invited to places. It was unbelievable. And a young Afro-Brazilian man came to me at one of those engagements and he said, show up tomorrow at our school. I go, okay, you think you can get a few people together? He says, no problem. I got there were, the next day, 300 students. And they weren't just students that, like we think of students at UC Berkeley that are there financially supported. Education is free there, but the entrance exam is always preclusive. There were also community people there. And there was a young man who stood up in the audience after I spoke to say how glad he was I was there. He was 19. He lived in a favela, not far. And he said that he made a living by taking care of a disabled person who he was with. And he said, I want you to know that one day someone gave me a tattered, overly read, falling apart Black Panther Party newspaper. And in it was a free food program. I'm meeting you today. You're the first person I've ever met of the Black Panther Party. I want you to know and tell your friends, if they're still alive, that I started a free food program in my favela. Now in Brazil, people don't just clap. They were stomping their feet and yelling and screaming and wanted to hug him, and you could just feel love filling the room for this young man. And I did everything I could not to cry, because I had to stand there and be on purpose. But I cried anyway. It was an amazing thing. Isn't that amazing to you? And what people here in the United States don't know is that those community survival programs were the heart of the Black Panther Party. There were 65 of them. What did you get in the news? Handsome Black men with guns. Women ran the Black Panther Party. Women created, sustained all of those programs across the country and in the world. There is no place, no continent in this world except Antarctica that didn't have some chapter of the Black Panther Party. Did you know that? This is why the government was afraid of us. We shamed them, we exposed them, we made them afraid. All the isms, every single one of them are based in fear. They're not based really in hatred. They're based in fear of the loss of control, of the loss of their narrative about history. Narratives, plural. So I'll end here because I have to end somewhere. But thank you. Thank you for listening. Thank you.
Estamos fazendo...
Bom dia. Como já foi falado aqui, meu nome é Hamilton Borges. E ontem teve um ritual muito importante que lembrava dos ancestrais. Hoje eu gostaria de lembrar o nome de Malcolm X, Malcolm X, que hoje completa não sei quantos anos, mas foi hoje o dia em que ele nos deixou com luta. E Malcolm X e os Panteras Negras, como foi dito por Christen realmente são inspiração muito importante para várias pessoas no Brasil. E eu vou tentar falar sobre isso. Eu preparei uma coisa aqui, escrevi hoje pela madrugada. E quando falo madrugada, é que nós não estamos conseguindo dormir. Então a gente acorda 3 horas da manhã aqui, porque tem um fuso horário. Então a gente não consegue dormir. Então madrugada é madrugada mesmo. Eu escrevi isso aqui por 2 propósitos. É uma forma de agradecer a todos os voluntários e voluntárias que estão trabalhando nisso aqui, inclusive as tradutoras e os tradutores, o pessoal que tem feito, colocado café na mesa, que tem colocado as estruturas para a gente. Queria começar agradecendo essas pessoas e agradecer também a Tiana, a Fátima, Maria de Fátima e Milena, pelo cuidado que teve com a gente aqui durante esse tempo. Eu queria controlar bem o tempo, portanto, eu não poderei agradecer a todas as pessoas. Eu queria cumprimentar as pessoas do meu país. Daqui é um país completamente violento. O Brasil, para vocês terem ideia da perspectiva em que nós falamos, do lugar que nós falamos, o Brasil é uma grande cadeia. O Brasil é uma grande prisão para nós, pessoas pretas. Mas a perspectiva de luta não tem nenhuma possibilidade da gente sair dali, porque as coisas vão piorar ou deixar de piorar, porque nós não podemos sair sozinhos e deixar as outras pessoas lá. Nós precisamos continuar numa guerra. A perspectiva em que eu falo, e eu sou de organização política. Nós acreditamos em organização política. Os Panteras Negras eram uma organização política. Os palestinos tiveram uma luta de libertação e têm uma luta de libertação a partir de experiências de organização política. A África do Sul implementou uma luta de libertação a partir da luta de organizações políticas. A perspectiva de organização política nos permite que nós não pensemos a partir do nosso individualismo, a partir da nossa própria consciência individual de que nós estamos fazendo grandes coisas, mas a partir de uma experiência coletiva. E nós acreditamos nisso. Só que essa crença, ela sempre é criticada no Brasil como se fosse uma coisa anacrônica, como se fosse uma coisa do passado e superada. Mas a própria conjuntura demonstrou para a gente, para a maioria das pessoas, que uma organização política para os pretos e pretas no Brasil é a nossa única saída. Eu queria reforçar essa lembrança muito importante de Christen Smith. Nós nos conhecemos, eu acho que era 2000, ela disse que é 2001. Eu estava fazendo um espetáculo. Que se chamava Visibilidade dos Tambores. E depois nós nos encontramos no outro dia no bairro 2 de Julho. Não existia nenhum tipo de aplicativo que pudesse fazer com que a gente pudesse se comunicar. O único aplicativo era o papel, o dicionário, e a gente usava era a caneta. E ela estava com o dicionário e eu com... A gente ali ia conversando a partir dali, não foi, Cris? E Christian, ela apontou essa possibilidade, nós precisamos ligar a luta. E essa ideia de ligar a luta transformou, isso ecoou em nossa cabeça. A primeira questão para nós, que é fundamental, que a nossa luta é internacional. A nossa luta continua sendo internacional. Eu caminho pelas ruas aqui dos Estados Unidos. O primeiro Black Panther que nós encontramos, na verdade, foi Robert King, no Texas, que você organizou todo o nosso encontro, e eu chorei, emocionado, como eu chorei agora, encontrando aqui essa mulher que para nós é maravilhosa por toda a sua história, todo o seu passado e que continua lutando. A luta preta no mundo, ela não pode ser negociada. Assim como o Winnie Mandela, que nunca renunciou aos seus princípios políticos mais graves e que morreu com esses princípios políticos se tornando eterna entre nós. E é esse caminho que nós queremos seguir. Eu vou, então, cumprir a minha promessa de ler isso aqui e cumprir em torno de 10 minutos da fala que é proposta. Eu estou colocando aqui questões que dizem respeito ao que nós temos acumulado em minha organização. E é justamente para gerar o debate, tanto aqui como em todos os lugares em que nós, pretos e pretas, estamos. Porque ninguém está a salvo das sequelas do racismo. Ninguém está a salvo, não importa em que lugar você mora, se você mora num país colonizado, se você mora no império, a nossa situação é uma situação idêntica e as nossas saídas, elas só vão ser criadas por nós mesmos. Eu queria fazer uma primeira provocação de uma coisa que eu ouvi ontem, talvez seja meu entendimento mais limitado, mas parece que existe uma perspectiva de que os brancos, por mais aliados que eles estejam, por mais sinceros que eles sejam em abraçar a causa negra, parece que existe uma perspectiva de uma possibilidade de uma educação aos brancos, ou de que nós podemos salvar os brancos, ou que nós podemos convencer os brancos a não serem antirracistas. Isso é uma coisa que nós temos discutido no Brasil. No Brasil se fala muito em promoção da igualdade, mas é uma igualdade que só os negros querem. Só os negros parecem que querem ser iguais aos brancos. E essa perspectiva de chamar os brancos, parece que a gente não combinou com os brancos. Porque, pelo menos, no lugar onde eu estou, os brancos vivem muito bem, obrigado. Os brancos se beneficiam com a nossa desgraça coletiva e os brancos pouco se importam com o que nos está acontecendo. Mas nós da Reaja temos uma palavra de ordem, uma outra palavra de ordem, que é um ditado popular. Quem tem sua dor é quem geme. Quem tem que chorar pelas mortes negras são os negros. Quem tem que lutar contra as mortes negras são os negros. E nós temos bastante instrumento teórico, político e histórico para forjar a nossa própria liberdade. Saudações a todas as pessoas aqui envolvidas, em especial abraço a Fátima, Tiana e Milena. Primeiramente, devo dizer que sou de organização política e a experiência coletiva, para nós, é muito mais rica que qualquer experiência individual. Acreditamos na necessidade de uma luta de libertação nacional. Eu estou falando muito rápido? Thank you. Acreditamos numa luta de libertação nacional dos pretos e pretas e acreditamos que os pretos em África e diáspora devem ser um pacto para construir essa libertação. É complicado falar de uma identidade preta brasileira, desde o ponto de vista da construção da nação. O Brasil é um país pautado na violência gratuita contra os que não são brancos. Uma violência extrema. Brasil é nome de uma mercadoria, pau-brasil, explorada pelos brancos europeus. Nós chegamos aqui, aquele país, como mercadoria em tumbeiros, navio-negreiros. Assim, não existe uma identidade cultural dos negros no Brasil. A ideia de afro-brasileiro, para nós, não deve fazer sentido, porque se em afro eu sou sujeito, em brasileiro, que é nome de uma mercadoria, de um objeto, eu sou objeto. Nós éramos considerados tão objetos como o pau-brasil ou uma vaca. Os nossos status jurídicos eram de objeto, que podia ser vendido, adquirido. Como que eu posso me orgulhar em ser afro-brasileiro? Eu posso me orgulhar de ser africano. E é esse orgulho que a gente carrega, e é esse orgulho que deve sustentar nosso tipo de luta. Porque o Brasil foi construído como um projeto para os brancos, dos brancos, e continua desse jeito. Desculpem, vou pegar aqui de novo. Nós chegamos àquele país como mercadoria. Assim não... Ah, meu Deus do céu. Não existe uma identidade racial para os negros no Brasil, como brasileiros. Existe guerra racial de alta intensidade. Existe sufocamento. Eu uso essa palavra sufocamento, eu acho que todos os meus conterrâneos aqui, todas as pessoas que vieram do Brasil vão usar essa palavra, sufocamento, que era também uma palavra muito usada por Frantz Fanon. Porque esse sufocamento, acho que, eu não sei, Hugh Grant, eu não sei pronunciar o nome, ele foi sufocado também aqui nos Estados Unidos, né? Oscar Grant foi sufocado aqui numa situação de violência policial. Recentemente, um garoto negro de 19 anos, Gonzaga, ele foi sufocado por um segurança armado de um shopping, de um supermercado, apenas porque ele estava transitando, apenas porque ele estava naquele local. Mas isso não é uma coisa incomum, é uma coisa muito comum. É uma banalidade a morte de pessoas pretas no Brasil. O que não é comum também, deveria ser, é que quando Oscar Grant foi sufocado, vocês queimaram tudo aqui. Vocês jogaram carro para cima. Vocês pararam os Estados Unidos. E lá nós ainda temos uma perspectiva, que é uma perspectiva de pedir ao Estado e de pedir às organizações da supremacia branca que parem de nos matar. A supremacia branca não vai parar de nos matar porque nós pedimos para parar de nos matar. Eles não vão ser convencidos assim, com um pedido desse jeito. Nós temos que impor um prejuízo ao Estado brasileiro, que ele perceba que nós somos maioria e que nós podemos impor esse prejuízo. Por isso, essa referência constante ao que significou o Partido dos Panteras Negras. E que significa um projeto calculado para os pretos se odiarem, se machucarem, desconfiarem uns dos outros. Na verdade, quando a polícia chega para matar, estamos praticamente mortos. Eu moro numa cidade, Salvador, Christen conhece, Tiana conhece Salvador. Eu moro numa cidade que existem bairros, como, por exemplo, de Fazenda Coutos, onde meu filho mais velho mora, que ele é um bairro semelhante a um bairro qualquer da África do Sul, em 1950, sob o regime do apartheid. É um bairro onde nós bebemos uma água que tem coliforme fecal. É um bairro que não tem nenhum posto de saúde que funcione. É um bairro onde as crianças abandonam a escola em torno de 10 anos. Elas abandonam a escola. E a única presença do Estado nesse bairro é a polícia fortemente armada. A experiência da escravização preta deixou sequelas, marcas em nossos corpos sentidas até hoje. Foi uma experiência de sofrimento, dor, perdas e, sobretudo, ódio. Queria entrar num perigoso campo de um conceito que tenho repetido e espero que não seja mal interpretado, ou interpretado como o ódio de classes, ou a política do ódio fascista de supremacia branca, ou interpretado como um pregador de ódio. Ocorre que não podemos combater a brutalidade que se dirige a nós pelos signatários da supremacia branca com beijos, poesia e abraços. Não podemos fazer esse combate apelando para o bom senso dos brancos que lucram com nossa miséria, pedindo, como eu já disse antes, que parem de nos matar. Eles não vão parar. Nós é que devemos agir, reagir. Por isso o nosso movimento Reaja ou Será Morta, Reaja ou Será Morto. E isso é quilombismo. Os quilombos foram experiências bem-sucedidas de reterritorialização africana, exercício de liberdade plena forjada na guerra. O militante Abdias do Nascimento, militante brasileiro, o decano Abdias do Nascimento, me perdoem, gente, analisando a história dos quilombos no Brasil, forjou o conceito de quilombismo como instrumento de construção de uma identidade preta. Quilombismo traz a ideia de independência financeira, autonomia, conquista de território, produção alimentar e industrial próprios. Capacidade bélica para enfrentar o inimigo. Uma educação e cultura centradas em valores civilizatórios africanos. Das experiências de quilombo no Brasil, experiências que se espalham por todo o território nacional, um território gigantesco, queria destacar uma, a experiência do quilombo do Urubu, em Salvador, comandado por uma mulher, uma arqueira que invadia a cidade dos brancos e libertava os escravizados. Ela era zeferina. Ela cortava a cabeça dos pretos que queriam se manter cativos, que queriam continuar escravos. Ela deu tanto trabalho ao império que eles criaram uma polícia para capturá-la. A polícia do Brasil nasceu em 1825. Os cariocas reivindicam para si essa primazia. Mas não foram os cariocas, não foi no Rio de Janeiro. O que foi criado no Rio de Janeiro foi uma polícia que era a guarda pessoal do rei, que ainda existe até hoje no Palácio do Planalto. Bolsonaro anda com pessoas com chapéu vermelho, aqueles soldados. Mas ali não era a polícia ostensiva. A polícia ostensiva se chamava Brigada Militar do Estado Brasileiro. Continuou com esse nome apenas no Rio Grande do Sul. A polícia, ela nasceu para combater quilombos, para matar pretos, em qualquer situação dada, para combater uma mulher arqueira, zeferina, e ela continua fazendo a mesma coisa. Por favor, qualquer coisa em relação ao meu tempo, eu posso interromper na hora, sem problema, certo? Em relação ao meu tempo, podem falar que eu interrompo e depois eu volto. 1 minuto? Ok. Depois a gente pode ter a oportunidade de debater isso melhor, mas eu gostaria de cumprir o meu tempo aqui. Mas eu gostaria de falar um pouco mais de zeferina. E quando eu falo de zeferina, eu digo que a experiência de dor e de desgraça a que estamos submetidos agora também pode ser compartilhada com a experiência de ação, reação e combate de nossa parte. Zeferina era uma mulher dentro de um território hostil, diante de um sistema escravocrata, que comandou um quilombo, que é a reterritorialização, é você trazer a África para aquele território. E ela tinha como lema, quando ela entrava em Salvador, que era a capital do Brasil, aliás, não era mais a capital do Brasil, mas era uma capital importante, uma província importante, o lema dela era Viva Negro, Morra Branco. E ela foi considerada pelo rei daquela época como uma rainha. E ela continua em nossa memória. Nós tivemos, ao longo do século XX, uma série de ações e construções políticas dos negros e negras. Ao longo do século XIX, muitas rebeliões, muitos levantes que buscavam a liberdade das pessoas pretas naquele país. Ao longo do século XX, instituições poderosas, sobretudo criadas pelas mulheres, instituições religiosas que marcaram a nossa humanidade. Porque é como dizem algumas pessoas aqui nos Estados Unidos, inspiradas em Francis Fanon. Nós, ao fim e ao cabo, não queremos ser negros, sermos pretos, sermos afro-brasileiros. Nós somos humanos, mas na experiência que nós temos no Brasil, eu não posso falar pelos Estados Unidos, nós não somos considerados humanos. A nossa morte não tem o menor sentido para ninguém. É como se matasse um inseto em qualquer momento. Basta ver os números que ostentam-se na cidade de Salvador. E isso só falando de Salvador. você tem em torno de 3.000 pessoas que foram assassinadas por agentes do Estado. Isso é uma guerra de alta intensidade. Segundo os números que a gente ouviu aqui em 2015, quando eu estive aqui na OEA, nos Estados Unidos, em 30 anos, eu acho que se matou 30 pessoas. 30. Em 30 anos, 30 pessoas. Em um ano, nós matamos 3.000 pessoas numa cidade que tem 3 milhões de pessoas. Mas eu vou deixar aqui para a gente poder debater e possivelmente discutir outros pontos que ficariam, que são pontos, o meu objetivo, que é o objetivo da minha organização, é criar polêmica, criar debate. A polêmica e o debate e o dissenso não tem que necessariamente nos levarmos à cisania, à briga, à zanga. Talvez nós queiramos ser convencidos da forma diferente, mas a experiência que nós temos dentro do nosso país é uma experiência muito cruel. Eu poderia, por favor, passar uma apresentação? Não dá tempo.
Eu vou falar em português rapidinho, depois eu vou falar em inglês. Como a Fátima falou hoje de manhã, só essa conversa podia ser o dia inteiro. E a gente reconhece isso e também reconhecemos que vamos continuar a conversa e vamos poder elaborar essa conversa mais ao longo do dia e até amanhã, não é? I was saying that, just like Fatima said at the very beginning, this conversation could go on all day. But one of the things that we realize is that we have the opportunity to be able to continue the conversation in the next sessions. And so we're not cutting this off. We're going to pause this particular part of the conversation and then continue the conversation later. But one of the things that we want to do is be able to open it up for a dialogue and a conversation between both Ericka Huggins and Milton Borges. And I know that we have questions from the audience. So what we are doing is under your seats, there are index cards, and you can put your questions inside the baskets. And then Fatima and Jess are going to bring the questions to me, and then I'll be able to also ask some questions as well, okay? But one of the things that I wanted to start out with in terms of conversation, because I really think it's an opportunity to have a conversation, is to talk a little bit about your trajectories, your political trajectories. And particularly, we have two people here who are growing up in completely different hemispheres, but have similar approaches to thinking about what it means to contribute to the world in terms of community and the fight for freedom, right? And so I wanted to see if you could say one thing about how you grew up, right? One experience that you had as a child that you believe was that moment that really sparked who you later became as a political person.
Thank you, Amoten. When I was 15, I went to the March on Washington for Jobs and Freedom. A lot was happening before then because I grew up in Southeast Washington, D.C. Do any of you know D.C.? Not the White House, but the real D.C.?
I grew up in D.C. I was going to tell you that, but I'll tell you later.
In Southeast?
No, not Southeast. Yeah, rivals.
The reason I mentioned Southeast is because how many of you know East Oakland? East Palo Alto? What's in Texas that's comparable?
3rd Ward in Houston.
So, and as my son told me, there's Atlanta and then there's Georgia. So this is a nationwide experience, but I just mentioned DC because it is the seat of governmental power. And I was always asking questions. And on the day of that march on Washington in 1963, I told my mother I was going. I was polite. And she said, no, you'll get hurt. I said, no, I won't. I have to go. And I took 2 buses. I got there. And a lot happened for me. First of all, I was standing there noticing, it felt like thousands of African American people. It was really many hundreds. But it was the biggest thing I'd ever seen that wasn't a concert. And as I stood there, I recognized all the people on the stage, because this was during the civil rights movement, as we call it in this country. Really all of it, as Malcolm X said so wisely, is really human rights, because civil rights are the rights you're due by law. And human rights, as you were pointing out, are the rights you're due by birth. We are all human. But slavery made it so the excuse for the economic boom was that we were only a little bit human. The justification is racism, is racist. And I know in the United States people have an allergy to that word, but it means something about a system of advantage based on race. It's really simple. And it's structural, it's systemic. Nobody in this room created it unless you're immortal. So, and I know you're not. So I stood there that day, this 15-year-old girl, and I looked out at the sea of people who'd come from everywhere on foot, on bus, in church buses, school buses, vans, dump trucks, you name it, people came for jobs and freedom. And on the stage were Martin Luther King and Rosa Parks and many, many other great speakers. But I didn't hear any of the speeches. I heard one word. Lena Horne, a vocalist, actress, and activist, rushed to the front of the stage, the dais there, and I watched her. And she sung freedom, 2 syllables. And when she sung that word freedom, the whole hundreds of people fell silent. And the syllables entered our ears, and for me, landed in my heart. And at that moment, a vow arose. I will serve people for the rest of my life. I didn't know what would unfold in the tapestry of my life. I didn't know that I would end up a widow and a single mom due to government violence by the time I was 20. I didn't know I'd be incarcerated for conspiracy. I didn't know any of these things. I just knew I had to take the risk to serve. I just want to comment on what I just said. I want us to live. I don't want you to be incarcerated. I don't want any more of your loved ones to be taken from you. I just wanted to say that, and I don't really have a reason for it. I just want to put that out in the air. I want us to live. I don't want us to survive. I want us to thrive. And I believe that if there are forces at play that do not want that for us or are in denial about the need for it, then we must step forward. We must do it. We, as June Jordan said, we are the ones we are waiting for.
Thank you so much.
Eu não sei se eu tenho uma experiência na adolescência que me levou à militância política. Mas eu nasci num bairro chamado Curuzu, que tem um bloco chamado Ileaiê. Então, todas as pessoas do meu bairro, da região onde eu nasci, na Liberdade, todas as pessoas são pretas. Todas elas são pretas. Aí, talvez com 15, 16 anos, eu fui para um bairro da Orla Marítima, que era o bairro onde moram os brancos. Era como se eu nunca tivesse visto os brancos, em tantos brancos juntos. E o que a gente foi fazer, mesmo tendo praia para o objetivo era pular o muro de um clube, que era o Clube Espanhol, para tomar banho de piscina, porque a gente nunca tinha tomado banho de piscina. E os mais velhos, eles já tinham uma expertise, e eles pulavam. E um dia eu consegui pular, eu e a minha turma, 15, 14, 16 anos. E eu pulei esse muro, e eu vi a piscina e os brancos em torno dela. Eu tinha shorts grandes e sem cinto, eu segurava assim os shorts para não cair. Quando eu caí na piscina, o short foi embora. E eu vesti, mas não foi por isso. Imediatamente, os seguranças do clube sabiam que a gente não era dali. Eles sabiam. Luísa Barros, uma militante muito importante do Brasil, ela dizia o seguinte: nós carregamos a marca, nós não podemos negociar a ancestralidade. Talvez qualquer povo consiga negociar, dizer assim, não, eu não sou branco. Por isso que eu não acredito na ideia de que no Brasil alguém vai dizer assim, eu não sou branco porque eu tenho dinheiro. Roberto Carlos, por exemplo, jogador rico, milionário do Brasil, quando ele entrava em campo, os brancos da Europa jogavam banana, dizendo que ele era macaco. Então, o dinheiro não tira a nossa marca, assim como não tirou a minha marca naquele momento ali. E é uma experiência traumática, porque eles me colocavam a gente numa sala escura e só tiravam a gente quando acabava toda a história do clube. Ou seja, a gente ficava preso ali sem comer e sem beber água, vamos dizer que era de 10 horas da manhã até 8 horas da noite. Entendeu? Foi a primeira experiência de prisão que eu tive. E a primeira experiência de saber o que Malcolm dizia, que os brancos, white is devil, blue eyes. A partir dali eu tive que pensar isso. Porque depois de todas as vezes que a gente encontrou, que eu encontrei, tive experiência diante de uma pessoa branca, foram experiências para diminuir a minha humanidade. Então, isso marcou muito minha vida. Eu sempre falo disso, né? A gente ficava trancado. Como que você coloca uma criança, uma adolescente trancado num lugar, privado de água, porque ela queria apenas conhecer piscina? E olha o absurdo de Salvador. Eu não sei agora, mas você vivia 30 anos sem saber o que era uma piscina, porque piscina era exclusivo dos brancos. Só na África do Sul tinha isso, e nos Estados Unidos, não sei, nos anos 50. Então, essa que é a experiência que eu me lembro.
Thank you. I think it's such a powerful story to remember that racial democracy, as we've been sold it in Brazil, is a myth. And so we're talking about stories of absolute apartheid. We're talking about stories of racial violence that are blatant, that are transparent, that are happening in a space that allegedly doesn't have race or racism. And I think what's really fascinating about that is that when I hear about Hamilton stories from Liberdade, and you talk about Southeast, and although I didn't grow up in Southeast, I know Southeast. And I definitely know how...
And it hasn't changed.
It hasn't changed, despite gentrification of DC generally. Southeast has always been a space that has been marginalized in DC, but it's also been a very black space. Even
Absolutely.
though DC is a black city, for those who don't know DC very well, it was a black city.
It was chocolate
It was
city.
chocolate city. But Southeast was always that space that really embodied blackness in a way that the rest of the city did not, in very similar ways to Liberdade. And I think that one of the things that, in an interview that you did a few years back, I was reading about the story that you talk about recognizing people sleeping in cars, right, in Southeast.
I was 8 years old. And I asked my mother, Mama, why? It was wintertime. Why do the people who live in the housing, we call it the projects. You know the projects? I don't know what you call that in Brazil. It's housing for that is not fit for humans, but exists. Thank you. Coabe. Projects. So, and so right across the street from where we lived in a working class neighborhood, so to speak. Working class is relative, middle class is relative when you're African American. But we lived in houses. In DC, they have semi-detached houses, 2 houses connected in a space and then 2 more and like that. Nothing fancy. But across, we could see the housing project, and often in the winter, children couldn't come to school because they didn't have shoes. This was in the late 1950s. I'm not talking about in the 1850s. And they would sleep sometimes in their cars because they could turn the heater on, because they didn't have heat in their homes. And I asked my mother why. Now, she was from the South, from North Carolina, a little tiny town. She said, and she would tell me stories often. So I figured I could ask her this question and she'd tell me a story. And she said, Sugar, I just think it's just mean. It's mean. She said, you know, this was when she first told me about slavery. She said, white people own black people. What? Yeah, just like we got a dog, but we treat the dog good. But like an animal, like a cow. I didn't know what to do with this information, so I started asking her questions because I was a very curious child. And she would often have to tell me, Ericka, that's enough questions for today, sugar. So I said, well, how did they own them? They brought them on ships and dropped them all over. I think beyond the United States, because she didn't know. She only went to high school. But owned them, took their lives, separated their families, took their babies. You know, your grandfather was a descendant of a freedman, which meant that his great-grandfather was a slave. And she said, so this owning ended on paper, but continued so that there is segregation. She called it prejudice. There's prejudice housing, there's prejudice education, there's prejudice everything, sweetheart. I didn't have any words. How could grown-ups be so mean and hateful? So I asked her a question that she often would tell me was important to remember. I said, Mama, didn't they have any home training? Which meant to her, common sense, compassion. Your parents told you not to hate other people because of what they look like. And she said, I don't know, sugar, but I think they pass it on to their children. And their children pass it on to their children. And here we are, sweetie pie. So I am so adamant that it is important for everyone to do their work. It's not my business whether you do it or not, and I cannot carry you through it. I cannot carry you through it. And I say that no one else can carry you through it. But it's important for you to look at history and recognize the impact of history on today, because we still have apartheid education. We still have apartheid living. We still have institutions of society that are filled with black and brown people. I'm talking about the prisons and the juvenile prisons. We incarcerate more people than any other country in the world. And at least by now, 2/3 of that population of incarcerated men and women are black and brown. So all of this is very important as we have to start the conversation. The conversation continues in your heart. Let me say that again. The conversation continues in your heart. What is action? That was one of the things that I came here thinking about. What transnational action can we do? I intentionally went to Brazil to learn, to give if I could, but to learn. I went to South Africa to learn. I went to Portugal and hung out with African people to learn. We have to be willing to learn, especially if we call ourselves part of an academy of learning. And I'm going to stop there, but that impacted me. And also, Hamilton, in DC, in Southeast, there was a famous swimming pool called Glen Echo. It's still commemorated in writing, but you could not go to Glen Echo Pool if you were me or you. And we tried, but we were told black people were not allowed in the pool because it might rub off. The height of ignorance. So we had no pool to go to. So the story really touched my heart.
Thank you both for sharing those parts of your childhood. And I think in the conversation, two things come out that I think are really important for everybody in the audience to know about both of you. The first is the way that childhood has been a part of your political struggle, aspect of your community engagement and your justice seeking and your freedom fighting. And I think a lot of it has to do with recognizing the way that children are so wounded and so pained by these experiences of anti-Blackness. And the other thing that you both mentioned, and I want you to both comment on both of those things, so your engagement with children in education, and the other thing you both mentioned was this question of the prison system. And I know this, but I don't know if both of you know this, that both of you are former political prisoners. And you have that experience as one of the things that really marks who you are. Not only as political folk, as folk who are fighting for justice and liberation, but also as people who are caring and are spiritually minded. And I want you to talk about those things. And part of what I'm doing, just so everybody knows, I'm bringing the questions and I'm trying to tie everybody's questions together. And so if you turn in a question, I'm getting to it. I'm trying to put them all together and make them speak to each other. So the first question is about education, and the second question is about the struggle against prisons and the experience of being political prisoners and how that affects politics.
And we have so little time left. I'm sorry, I have to leave here and catch a plane, so I'm mindful of time. However, why don't you go first and then I'll go after you.
Eu vou ser bem rápido. Eu, inclusive, estava nesse texto. Nos anos 70, foi criado um movimento que foi muito importante, que não foi o primeiro da década do século XX, porque tivemos a Frente Negra Brasileira, várias organizações, mas, na minha perspectiva, foi um movimento que foi crucial, porque ele foi radical, Movimento Negro Unificado. E tem duas coisas que a Reaja assume que são heranças de outros grupos. O primeiro, a ação cultural comunitária. Nós, da sua organização, ela acredita em ação comunitária. Por isso, nós criamos uma escola autônoma, uma escola que não depende de nada do governo. E essa escola, ela pretende criar, além da educação, para a gente... É um reforço escolar, mas a gente pretende ser uma escola regular. É uma escola que tem o nome Winnie Mandela, demos esse nome com ela em vida, pela experiência dela também. E essa ideia, a experiência dos Black Panthers, André acho que vai falar sobre isso, e Onirê também vai falar sobre isso, acho que amanhã, essa coisa da segurança alimentar, da gente alimentar as nossas crianças, alimentar a nossa comunidade, responsabilizar os mercados. Os mercados nas comunidades negras, em Salvador, mesmo quando as comunidades são as mais pobres, o dono do mercado é o branco. O branco que explora aquele mercado. Ele mora em outro lugar, mas aí ele tira e suga o dinheiro da nossa comunidade. Então, nós abrimos uma escola, a gente procura de todas as formas, os meios, para garantir que as crianças tenham educação, material escolar e alimentação. Porque, como eu, na minha infância, muitas crianças chegam na escola sem ter o que comer. Então, isso para a gente é muito importante. Nós acreditamos que nós devemos criar experiências de educação do nosso próprio povo. A outra coisa é em relação a... o MNU ele disse assim, todo preso negro é um preso político, em 1978. A esquerda, que é a esquerda branca, que chegou no poder, inclusive, ela dizia que essa perspectiva do MNU, de um movimento negro, dividia a luta política, a luta maior política, que era a luta da implantação de uma nova ordem e tal, e que depois que a gente conquistasse o poder, aí se debateria as questões de raça, de gênero, e eles falavam dos presos políticos brancos, mas eles não diziam nada da situação dos encarcerados. Esse status de preso político, eu não podia reivindicar sem o MNU, porque eu fui um preso comum. E, no Brasil, o preso comum pode passar por toda sorte de desgraça. A alimentação que nós comemos dentro da prisão, o trabalho forçado que é exercido dentro da prisão, sobretudo agora com o processo de privatização, que é esse modelo norte-americano que chegou no Brasil, e não chegou no governo Bolsonaro, chegou antes. Né? Quer dizer, esse processo, tudo isso é uma marca da escravidão. E eu não teria o status de preso político como você me dá agora, sem a presença e a luta forte do movimento negro no meu país.
There's so many similarities, and why is that? So the Black Panther Party, its flagship program was a school, and it sounds like it's very similar to Winnie Mandela, although it existed between 1971, actually, in one form, and then moved to its building in East Oakland and was there from 1973 until 1982. And I was the director of that school. That for me it was an honor, and I'm humbled to talk about it. We created it not knowing how a school is created. Here's how we did it, Christen. We said, so what was it that we didn't have? Well, we weren't loved. We weren't welcomed. We weren't taught the truth. We weren't given the benefit of every child is brilliant and immensely good. Let's give that. Let's have a curriculum that could be very simple. English, language arts, mathematics, science. Let's grow food. Let's teach the children to meditate, because I taught myself to meditate when I was incarcerated. That's what saved my life, because I was in isolation and then in solitary confinement. I think we think of spiritual practice as if it is religious. It is of spirit. And that's something I love about Brazil. It is alive with spirit. But back to the school, we taught the children to meditate. You know, it was an elementary school, so it was 3 minutes every day. It was beautiful, and they remembered it because they talked to me about it when I interviewed them for my master's thesis on race and gendered education, a prescriptive model, Oakland Community School. So, one thing about that school is that we constantly love them actively. Not just we love children, whatever. Constantly love them and affirm their goodness while telling them they could not be intolerant of each other. And rather than disciplining them physically, emotionally, all those abusive things that go on in our schools today, not the fault of teachers, the fault of the old warehousing system of taking children in. We told them that respect was uppermost, that they could not fight, they could not name call, but instead of detention, we'd have them go outside into a courtyard. It was an old church building that we bought eventually, and do the tree pose. You see, you can't do the tree pose, it's a yoga pose, out of balance. You'll fall on your face or your butt. You can't do the tree pose if you're not breathing and having an awareness of your body and yourself in it. And they'd come back and they say, okay, Miss Ericka, I'm ready to learn now. But you see, we don't give that opportunity to children, especially little black boys. Whereas other boys are told, well, boys will be boys. So every benefit we never got, we gave. And it was hard because it meant we had to re-educate ourselves. And in Brazil, when I was there, women particularly would come and tell me about all the different names for skin color. I think there were 23 to 25 names for the shade of color and the status that goes with it. And then when I was in South Africa, same thing, only more ridiculous. You know, apartheid has not ended. Did you know that? It's in place. But at the school, no one was judged by how they looked, how they thought, who they wanted to love, who they loved, who their parents were or were not. Nothing like that. And it was an oasis in the desert. And I wish it could be replicated again, but it takes hard work and effort. We found out that money is a detail. We built it, and people came, and students came, and it was a miracle how it all happened. So I think all I want to say is that these similarities the goodness of the similarities can be replicated. And I'm hoping that there are people who can do that. I really do have to leave. I'm so sorry. This could have been scheduled for 4 hours. Yes. I'm so sorry I have to leave, but
Well, I want to say thank you before you leave.
thank you.
And I want to say that the fact that it could have been 4 hours means we have to do it again at some point.
And again and again
And
and
again and again and again and
again.
again and again.
And in different locations
Absolutely.
in the world.
Absolutely. Next in Brazil. Absolutely.
And not on a college campus.
I think we should do it in the prison. I'm going to put that out there, which is possible. But I want to say thank you. And I want to say thank you to all of you. I realized that we didn't get to some of your questions, but I think many of your questions got answered in the answers that they gave, particularly towards the end.
And my friend and my brother is still here. He doesn't have to leave, does he?
Absolutely, yeah, absolutely, absolutely. So we can. So can we? Do you want us to continue the conversation? Yeah.
E aí chegaram os negros, com toda a sua cultura, toda a sua tradição, toda a sua religião. Nunca pense em desistir do que se quer. Os inimigos estão testando a nossa fé. Olhos atentos pra saber como é que é. PANIJE. Nunca pense em desistir. pra destruir aquele que insiste nos deter, pra descobrir todas as formas de sobreviver. Cabelo trançado